Hi, guys. Welcome back to Crime Time with Jess. So, today, my guest, Lauren Dellin, we had a real doctor on the stand, guys. Okay, Dr. Eric Christensen, the medical examiner. His testimony was very good. My words are escaping me, Lauren Dellin. But specifically about Tammy having bruises. This was huge testimony. We seen John Pryor absolutely get frazzled and start testifying himself instead of asking the witness questions. And we saw Lindsay Blake she was on top of him today. I've said it 100 times. She was on top of him today with her objections, and they were sustained because how do you defend the undefendable, Glory? Hi, Lolo. How do you defend the undefendable? So I'm going to play Dr. Christensen's. I'm going to let him come onto the stand. I want to really drill it in here. I'm playing quarterback, lawyer, his backgrounds, because we had the coroner, which was really horrible and tough for people to watch. No medical backgrounds, almost no. Glory, help me.
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to figure out how to
connect. No experience.
Oh, yes. The coroner, as I hear it, she had been appointed coroner 6 weeks before before Tammy died. So you've got somebody with 7,000 autopsy versus a coroner with six weeks of being on call.
As opposed to the medical examiner, Dr. Eric Christensen, that we saw today, his background, Glory.
Yeah.
What did you say? How many autopsies did he do?
It was 7,000 plus. I can't remember just how many, but let's say 7,500 just.
So again, a ton of experience. And I'm going to play that part just so that we can be very clear about what this guy, his background and his credentials. Because I feel like this absolutely makes up for the coroner. And he also talks about how he certifies their report. So the coroner signs this was a homicide, but he goes behind them and certifies it with a medical background. I feel like that's very important. Can you see the screen, Lori?
Yes.
Lori, oh my God, I just called you Lori. If you want to slap me, Glory, you are welcome. That was an egregious, you know what, sidebar. Can we have a sidebar, please? Okay. John Pryor will now be known as Sidebar Sally. We're throwing that in there. So, okay, let's go to this. 34, 48. All right.
Thank you,
Your Honor. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Yes,
wait. I gotta turn that down. I had it at 2 times speed. I was trying to find the specific part, but we are going to go up to 1.5.
Christensen, E-R-I-K, last name C-H-R-I-S-T-E-N-S-E-N.
Are you currently employed?
I'm currently self-employed.
What position? Did you recently retire from a position?
Yes, I retired on April 1st as the chief medical examiner for the state of Utah.
How long had you held that position as a chief medical examiner?
I've been in that position since 2016, and I've been in the office there since 2008.
Prior to working there in Utah, had you worked at other medical examiners' offices?
Yes, I trained in forensic pathology in 2000 to 2001, and then was employed in that office for a year. And then I worked in South Carolina at the Greenville County Medical Examiner's Office for 6 years before moving to Utah.
And what education do you have in order to be a forensic pathologist?
I have an
Extensive.
undergraduate degree in philosophy from Brigham Young University. I have a medical degree from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. And then I completed internship training in pediatrics at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and then did 4 years of anatomic and clinical pathology training at Madigan Army Medical Center. And then after leaving the Army, completed a 1-year fellowship training program in forensic pathology at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Richmond, Virginia.
Extensive
Can you
background.
explain a little bit about what a pathologist is?
Sure. Pathology is a specialty of medicine, just like surgery or internal medicine or pediatrics. And it is primarily aimed at the diagnosis of diseases, disease conditions, abnormalities of the body by evaluation of fluids, cell samples, tissue samples, and in some cases, autopsy samples as well.
When you reference autopsies, is that a special branch of forensic pathology?
Autopsies, training in autopsy performance is part of general training for all pathology residents in anatomic pathology. And then training in forensic autopsies is a separate part of the 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology.
In Utah, because you've talked about, you've worked in some other jurisdictions or some other areas, correct?
Yes.
In Utah, with regard to a death certificate, who is it that would determine the cause and manner of death?
Pay
So
attention.
in probably 80% or so of the deaths in the state, death certificates are signed by whoever the person's attending physician is. If they have a doctor who knows their health conditions and understands why they might have died, then that person will sign the death certificate. For the 20% or so cases that fall under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner in Utah, those deaths are certified by one of the forensic pathologists at the Office of the Medical Examiner. And those deaths are things that you would expect would fall to the jurisdiction of the medical examiner, deaths that are sudden, unexpected, violent, or otherwise non-natural.
And you referenced the medical examiner system. Are you familiar with another type of system used?
Yes, nationally, there is not a lot of uniformity to death investigation systems. At the time, just historically, most states had coroners that were part of the constitutional structure of each state, just like the Constitution of the state might say each county shall have a sheriff that's elected on this cycle. Most of them also had a provision that said each county will have a coroner that will be elected on such and such a cycle with these required qualifications. Starting in the late 1800s, there was some change of that over time. So now there is really kind of a hybrid across the country where you have some states that still exclusively have county-based coroner death investigation systems. You have some states like Utah that are entirely medical examiner systems, and then you have others that are hybrid where maybe some of the larger metropolitan areas will have medical examiners, but the smaller rural counties will still have coroners.
And to be clear, you are not a coroner. Is that correct?
I'm not.
And so your actual title would be medical examiner?
Yes.
And is the difference with that in large part your education and training?
It's mostly a difference in what the background is. To be a forensic pathologist, you essentially go through the things that I outlined in my education. You're required to have a medical degree. You're required to have training in forensic pathology. All 10 of the doctors in my office, where I recently retired from, are board certified forensic pathologists, whereas in most states, the requirements to be a coroner are that you be elected, that you be an adult. Some places require to be a registered voter, and you can't have any felony convictions or some variation of that.
And generally speaking, coroners do not perform autopsies, correct?
As a rule, they do not.
So that would be left to a medical examiner,
To a forensic pathologist.
forensic pathologist. So when you worked in systems that had a coroner, would you still then be the person that would conduct an autopsy if one was ordered?
Yes.
And under the medical examiner system, so let me back up. In those jurisdictions, is it the coroner that would make the decision to perform an autopsy initially or to request one?
That varies a little bit from place to place as well. In most cases, it is a decision of the coroner to decide whether an autopsy needs to be done in a given case where coroners exist.
And under the medical examiner system, who makes that determination?
It's done by the medical examiner.
So a forensic pathologist, someone with that additional training and experience.
Yes.
Okay, so I really just wanted to go through his credentials and things like that because this is a very important witness. This is offsetting what we saw with the coroner who just kind of botched the whole darn thing, honestly. So this is a real medical doctor. That's the point we're trying to drive. I'm trying to drive
If
home here.
memory serves, the coroner said that they had like 4 or 6 days of training too. So, she'd only been on the job for 6 weeks and she'd had like 1 week of training.
Because it's an elected position. It's an elected position. So you just don't have to have any felonies and this and that, which is concerning. I agree with a lot of people. I don't feel like this should be an elected position. I don't. A lot of people have said that. Totally agree. But I'm very glad that we have an actual medical examiner, a doctor here, extensive background, knows what he's looking for. And so we're going to go to him talking about the bruises because that's very significant. Okay.
One thing on coroners in a lot of jurisdictions, it's frequently that an undertaker is the coroner. So at least they have more experience with the dead and what looks normal and what doesn't look normal. So.
Okay, I'm sorry, Gloria. We're going to have to say sidebar, please. What is this comment? You have been watching too much Loin Fire, ma'am. Okay. Okay. So we want to get to these bruises, right? These are significant because, like you said earlier in your own live stream, Gloria, dead bodies don't bruise.
Yeah.
Now, Pryor is trying to say, well, she had anemia. Well, so do I. I really went paintballing over Easter break. I got shot 5 times. And I have a single bruise. And I have anemia. I take iron pills every day. My mother, like I said earlier, my mother has anemia as well. You can breathe wrong at her and she gets bruises. But as far as we know, Tammy wasn't on any sort of medication for anything, blah, 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 blah. Given the other circumstances that Alex Cox's phone pinged at a church near Tammy and Chad's house the night Tammy was murdered, correct, Glory?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was within a mile of the Daybell house. I'm not sure just how close, but within a mile.
Within a mile. He was
distance.
there. Yeah. So the prosecution today, well, I don't know if I have that time stamp marked down. Her recross. But either way, the prosecution is asserting that someone held Tammy down while another person suffocated her. Okay, and that person is obviously going to be Chad Daybell and Alex Cox because Alex's phone pinged at a church. I just want to point this out. Look at God working. Okay, look at God telling on Alex Cox, like, excuse me, can I enter the chat here? His phone was pinging at one of my little buildings right near the crime scene when this happened. So, prosecution asserting that Alex and Chad are the ones that murdered Tammy by suffocation. And there's a little bit of a pattern going on here. You have JJ suffocated. I don't know if this is Chad's favorite way to murder people or something, but you do have JJ being suffocated, duct tape wrapped around his neck, suffocated, and Tammy also dying from asphyxiation. So Gloria and I were talking earlier about Charles, and Charles was shot, as you guys all know, but I don't think anybody was probably strong enough to choke him out.
No, he was a professional baseball player, and they say the if he had wanted to take the bat and use it on them, he's going to have a lot more wrong with it. Alex would have a lot more wrong with his head than a little bump on his head.
Yeah, he had the tiniest little nothing on the back of his head.
he would have a fractured skull and
Skull.
be, yeah, and
And we
so
don't know how Tylee died. So she could have been suffocated. We don't know how Tylee died. I mean, we all have some speculations there as to how. Some people think she was shot. We do believe that there was some essay involved, giving the insertions into her hip bones and things like that, which is, but we ultimately do not know how she died. It could have been by suffocation. But you do see a bit of a tiny little pattern here with JJ and Tammy both dying from suffocation, and Alex Cox as well after his blessing. So I'm gonna try to go to the bruising because I want him to talk about that, and I timestamped that at 2 hours.
yeah, when they first mentioned bruising, I just thought, a few little bumps here and there, but displayed them on the
Arms.
diagram of the body, and it struck me as a lot more effectively than hearing about a few bruises. So
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll
it's,
go ahead and listen to that part.
Demonstrative purposes, Judge, I have an objection. Okay, Exhibit 179 will be admitted as a demonstrative exhibit. Ms. Blake, you may inquire.
And Your Honor, I would ask permission to publish.
You may publish.
Yeah. So there's a diagram of where the bruises were on her.
And Dr. Christensen, you can see on this exhibit, there's an R and an L that's been written in. Would you indicate what those represent?
Yes, those simply represent the right and left sides of the body. And at the bottom, I also indicated which was the front and which was the back, although that's fairly obvious.
And then it appears that there have been several dots or markings added. Could you explain what those represent?
Yes, they are not to scale, but they are representations of the locations where we identified bruises.
And on the front, there appear to be 6 dots. Is that correct?
Yes,
And then on the back of the body, 4 dots.
that's correct.
And you've already indicated they're not to scale, but can you talk about and put into the record where on the body these bruises were located?
Yes. There's one on the left upper chest, 3 over the anterior and lateral right biceps, 1 on the anterior right forearm, 1 over the anterior portion of the left biceps, 2 over the right triceps area on the back of the upper arm, and 2 on the back of the right forearm.
Did you discover any bruising on the lower extremities?
We did not.
Did you discover any bruising around the head or face area?
We did not.
And did you, in fact, take photos of the bruises that were observed during the autopsy?
Yes.
You talked before about the difficulty in determining the age of a bruise by simply looking at it. Is there something else that you did in this case to try to determine how recent the bruises occurred?
Yes. As I mentioned, just the visual appearance doesn't necessarily indicate to us how old a bruise is, but we can at least attempt to narrow that down somewhat by looking at the tissue in the bruise under the microscope. Blunt injuries, the body undergo a relatively orderly progression, although certainly not very time specific in a, to the minute or even to the hour sort of way. But initially, when there is an injury, you see just hemorrhage in the tissue. Then that will be followed some hours later. It can be as early as 2, might be as many as 12 or even 24 hours. You will then see inflammation start to enter the area to clean up the hemorrhage. And depending on the severity of it, you may then also see what are called macrophages that come in and start to clean up some of the broken down blood cells. You may see.
Sorry to pause, but I really just want everyone to pay attention to John Pryor and Chad Daybell, because this line of questioning is very bothersome to them. You see so much movement when he comes on. Did you guys notice Chad Daybell's movement all around? He's they're calm at this moment, but this testimony is significant. And you can really tell in the body language because Chad has sat like a stone so many times, but not during this. So
The formation of scar tissue, if it's significant, and that goes through a progression from early what are called fibroblastic cells in the area, which are just the cells that make scar tissue, which then eventually become replaced by the scar tissue itself. And that allows us seeing what kind of changes are present in an injury can give us an indication whether this is recent, meaning minutes to hours old, whether it's hours to days old, or whether it's days to weeks or even longer old. But more specific than those sort of broad swaths of time, we can't narrow it down.
We talked about during the autopsy, photos were taken to document the injuries.
Yes.
Were photos also taken of examination done of the injuries?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I have what's been marked as States Exhibit 178, A to Q. Counsel was provided a copy today.
The series of photographs, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. It's a series of photographs taken during the autopsy. And I believe the witness has been handled that jump drive. I would move for the admission of States Exhibit 178, A to Q.
And there would be no objection by the defense to that exhibit, Judge.
Okay, so exhibit 178, A through Q, it's 178 is the exhibit, A through Q are individual photographs within the exhibit, and they're all admitted, Ms. Blake.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask to be handed.
okay, I'm going to stop it there with the bruising. We got to see where the bruising was. I don't know exactly where it is, where Lindsay Blake says that. Well, actually, I do. It's in recross. But I kind of do you want to watch Pryor have a meltdown? Because I kind of want to watch Pryor have his meltdown. Because Pryor comes up to go at this medical examiner, and Lindsay Blake is just so on top of him with the objections because he's trying to do his crazy word salad nonsense because this witness is so damaging. So we'll watch Pryor try to put on his best defense here.
Quickly review that to make sure they are the exhibits you believe have been admitted. So those are admitted, Mr. Pryor.
Okay. And Doctor, you mentioned that you're retired as the chief, was it the chief medical examiner out of Utah?
Yes.
And that's out of Salt Lake City, is that right?
Taylorsville, but Salt Lake County, yes.
And I'm not familiar with Utah, so is that close to Salt Lake City?
Yes.
Okay. The government hub of the state of Utah, is that right? Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the initial cause of death reported for Tammy Daybell, and it did say pulmonary edema. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you were able to confirm that through this autopsy as well, correct?
I was able to confirm through the autopsy that pulmonary edema was present, but
Right.
not that it was the cause of death.
Okay. Now, when we talk about pulmonary edema in this particular case, can you tell me how long would it have taken to produce the kind of pulmonary edema that you found during the autopsy?
I don't know.
There's no way to determine that.
No.
And there's also no way to determine whether it had advanced or whether it had declined. You exhumed Tammy Daybell's body, and you have to report to the facts as you see the facts at the time upon the exhumation, right?
That's correct.
And at this point, you had initially indicated that you went in front of you didn't, but you were present when a hearing was held in front of a judge to make a determination as to whether or not they would have exhumed Tammy Daybell. Is that right?
Here he goes.
And do you recall from your knowledge what was the reason for the exhuming the body at that time?
My recollection is it was to determine the cause of death.
Well, there had to have been some facts. You don't get to just dig somebody up.
Your Honor, counsel's testifying. Move to strike.
Dig somebody up. I mean, like I was saying to you earlier, Glory, he's so brash that I know this is not going to sit well with a jury. I mean, no matter what you're saying, dig somebody up. You're in open court. Can you please use proper terminology? What compelled you to exhume her? He wants, why'd you dig her up? Why'd you dig her up? But again, Lindsay Blake is correct. John Pryor is more testifying than asking a witness the question. And I loved her today. I thought she did very well in court.
Strike.
Yeah, Lolo, he does over and over and
There has to be a reason at
over
the hearing
again.
to determine why you're exhuming.
Your Honor, counsel's still testifying.
Sustained.
Isn't it true, doctor, that there has to be a reason for the exhumation and not just be to re-examine findings? Is that correct?
I would assume so, yes.
Well, you were present. What was the reason given for digging Tammy Daybell's body back up?
I don't recall specifically what was presented.
Okay, so what was the purpose of you going there if you don't remember why they dug her up?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Let me slow it down because I do still have it at 1.5. I wanted to get to that part. We'll put it at 1.25.
Do you recall whether or not there were discussions about surrounding circumstances that could have influenced a decision to exhume?
I believe there were, yes.
Okay, and those circumstances that they justified for exhuming were the death of Charles Vallow, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying. The witness has said he doesn't recall.
The fact is those additional circumstances that you based the reason to dig Tammy Daybell up out of the ground was because of the death of Charles Vallow.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's misstating. This witness was not the one that requested exhumation.
Sustained.
Do you recall whether or not there was a discussion about the death of Charles Vallow at the exhumation hearing?
I do not.
Do you recall whether there was discussion of Brandon Boudreaux as a basis for the exhumation of Tammy Daybell's body?
I also do not know.
Okay, so you don't remember any reason, is that right, for why they decided to dig a body up out of the ground?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative, and it's asked and answered.
Sustained.
You don't have any explanation that you recall as to why they dug Tammy Daybell's body up out of the ground, do you?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative, and asked and answered.
Overruled on that.
You don't have any.
He gets to answer though.
I think I said previously, my
Did you notice that there was one objection by Lindsay Blake and Boyce didn't even rule on it prior, just stopped and changed the question because he knew it was going to be sustained, but I don't know why Boyce overruled that one. Not quite sure, but anyway, we'll keep going with Pryor and his. I just called this Pryor flipping out.
understanding was to determine the cause of death.
Okay. But you don't specifically remember the factors as to why they dug her up, right? That were offered to a judge?
I don't remember the specifics of the discussion.
Okay. And you don't, now you talked a little bit about Utah, and from what I understand, you can do it by request of the family, is that right? Or you can do it by request of going in front of a judge and giving justifiable reasons as to why you would dig a body up out of the ground, right?
God.
That is the way the statute reads.
Right. And in this particular case, the family was never notified, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation and irrelevant.
Overruled if the witness has.
Want to know where else they're going to dig them up out of the, other than the ground. I mean, do you dig them up out of a cloud?
Well, right. I mean, just continual objections there because again, Pryor was testifying and not asking questions, and if the digging her up out of the ground, I mean, you just make her sound like nothing. What made you want to dig her up out of the ground? You are a lawyer in a death penalty case right now. Again, I think I heard him use the word exhume once or twice. Dig her out of the ground. I just feel like that sort of hard, arrogant tactic in this setting is not going to work with a jury. I had a negative reaction to it. I didn't like his wording and the way he kept saying that, digging her up out of the ground. I just don't think this is going to go well. But again, like we were talking about, I'm glad.
I didn't hear him object to them digging up JJ and Tylee without getting permission of family.
Right. I almost feel like, I was thinking about this yesterday. I almost feel like the state and Pryor kind of know that JJ and Tylee are in the bag. I don't think Chad's getting out of that. They were literally in his backyard. I mean, but Tammy is the one that they really have to work for because there is some reasonable doubt you could create, like Pryor with the anemia and the bruising and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of emphasis on Tammy. And I do, like I told you, if he is not convicted, after all this testimony, even the testimony we've heard thus far, is enough for me to say, Chad Daybell, go to jail for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? And if that doesn't happen, I feel like I'm, for the third time in my life, going to lose faith in the justice system. First time being OJ, second Casey Anthony, and this would be the third. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think there, even so far, is enough evidence, and whatever we have after this, I think is just going to tap those nails into that coffin, for lack of a better term, even more. But should you want to keep going with the bruising, or because I want to get to Alice Gilbert, who is the next witness called after the medical. Oh no. Let's do Lindsay Blake's cross.
Oh yeah, that was good.
Yeah, her cross examination, because Pryor's a big ass crybaby in this. And you see what's happening, just objection all over the place. So Lindsay Blake gets to do a recross, and it was very good. She nailed the facts, the points right on home. And again, I think this is one of her. Oh, I went too far. Yep. This is one of
She
her
does it
better.
twice.
Yeah, there's the one. I know that's the one. Maybe that's not the one. There's Pryor again. I can't see. Oh, I think this is it. So this is her. This is a second recross.
You were also asked about whether or not you spoke to Chad's kids, and you indicated no.
That's correct.
Did any of Chad's kids ever reach out to the office of the medical examiner?
They did not, to my knowledge.
Oh wait, maybe we should do the first one. The first one was. Sorry, guys. I really should have been better prepared for that, but I think the first one's pretty important.
The fluid gets in there, it mixes with that protein and creates this bubbly, frothy.
No, where is it, Glory? I can't find her first recross where she really just lays out the facts. Because there's Pryor again. All right, I'm going to leave it at this one, I guess. Come on, Miss Blake. Come on down. I guess we'll get past this. Ah, what am I doing? I cannot find where that starts. And this is not it.
Based on your training.
Oh, this is it. This is it. Okay, good.
To reach these heavy lungs, we could get the same result, correct?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Not given the activities that she was described as doing. She may have been anemic, but she was not anemic to the point it would cause those kinds of problems.
All right.
She may have been anemic, but not to cause those kinds of problems.
In regards to a time of death, what I understood you were testifying to is there's really no definitive way to determine an accurate time of death. Would that be fair?
No way to determine a very specific time of death. A range, yes. A specific time, no.
Judge, I have nothing else. Thank you.
All right.
All right, so here's Miss Blake's. This is a second recross. Yes,
Correct.
Lori?
Thank you, Your Honor.
I can't remember. I think so.
But I think she
Dr.
knocks it out.
Christensen, you were asked a lot about the
Mark here.
vaccination order. Do you recall that?
I do.
You were not the one requesting that, is that correct?
That's correct.
You were also asked about whether or not you spoke to Chad's kids, and you indicated no.
That's correct.
Did any of Chad's kids ever reach out to the office of the medical examiner?
They did not. To my knowledge. It's possible they might have, and I was not aware of it, but they didn't reach out and ask for me.
Did anyone ever pass on information that they'd reported to the office of the Utah medical examiner?
No.
So you reviewed documents you were provided from law enforcement, is that correct?
Yes,
And those documents contained statements provided by Chad Daybell?
they did.
There were no documents provided that had significant information from his kids, is that correct?
There were some about his kids, various interviews that have been conducted with their friends and things of that nature, but no, not from them directly, I don't believe.
So you don't know You wouldn't know if the kids ever agreed to speak with law enforcement, is that correct?
I do not know.
And if Chad's kids had made statements about Tammy's health, would those have been documents that you would have requested or wanted to review?
Absolutely.
So if they weren't provided to you, would you have any reason to think that those exist?
No.
And you were asked about Utah being a little different than Idaho's system. Do you recall that question?
Yes.
Would you describe them as a little different?
There, I guess, Utah's and Idaho's death investigation systems are kind of on the opposite poles of the spectrum in the U.S.
And I think we talked about this, but Idaho, a coroner does not have to have any medical training, correct?
That's correct.
Whereas a forensic pathologist or medical examiner goes through years of schooling. They're a doctor.
Bleeding, sustained.
Your Honor, it's sustained on leading. Is that correct?
It's just,
Because I think it's in the scope.
It is.
it's not outside the scope, correct?
It's for my next question. I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I only sustained as it being leading.
I think we talked before, but you have worked in systems where a coroner is used, correct?
Yes.
And in your experience, do coroners have to have any medical training?
No.
And to be a forensic pathologist, again, what training do you go through?
Have to have a college degree, a medical degree, and residency training in pathology, and then forensic fellowship training.
And in Utah, again, who is it that would determine if an autopsy is to be completed?
It would be done by the Office of the Medical Examiner,
So one of the individuals that has all that medical training?
either by them or one of our investigators. And if there are questions, then they ask us.
You were asked about the 5 different, I believe, manners that can be indicated.
That's correct.
Is it common practice for the Office of the Utah Medical Examiner to look at the surrounding facts in addition to what's concluded from the autopsy?
Yes.
And I think you talked about an example of a drug overdose, that there could be several manners, even if that's the cause.
Yes.
And you were asked about a history of anemia. Can you explain what anemia is?
Anemia is when your blood count, the percentage of your blood that's made up of red blood cells drops below normal levels. Men have a slightly higher normal range than women, but they're both in the 35 to 50% range, more or less. That percentage of your blood is made up of red blood cells that carry oxygen around your body. You can develop anemia, which is a number lower than that for a variety of reasons. It can happen from vitamin deficiencies, can happen from iron deficiency, can happen from cancers, anything that infiltrates your bone marrow, can happen because you bleed. It's not uncommon in young women with heavy periods and things, for example, to end up being anemic because of blood loss. But it can be from traumatic blood loss as well. You can be acutely anemic because you got your arm broken and torn open in a car crash or something. All of those things can lead to anemia, but generally speaking, a progressive slow type of anemia, whether it's vitamin deficiency or something like that, is something that your body is able to compensate for to some extent, that you remain functional, though you might be fatigued or other things of that nature. But it's not, you don't have normal oxygen carrying capacity. And so if you went from living at sea level to the mountains, you might notice more of a difference than if you weren't anemic, things of that nature.
Sustained.
Is anemia treatable?
Yes, most times.
And I think you indicated you'd seen a history of Tammy having anemia maybe 5 years before her death.
I believe that's when it was documented, yes.
And if there were no other indications of anemia in her medical records, could that indicate that it was treated?
Overruled.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. We're not seeing any additional notations in medical records about anemia other than the past history. Could that indicate that the anemia was treated? Your Honor, if I may respond.
Go ahead.
Dr. Christensen's testimony was he saw a notation of it from 5 years previous to that, and Mr. Pryor went into it on his cross-examination.
No, I'm going to rule on that. It's overruled, Mr. Pryor. You can continue.
Could that indicate that the anemia was treated?
It could. It just means that it certainly was not mentioned again as a problem.
In looking at those medical records, do you recall seeing any indication that Tammy had low blood pressure?
Her blood pressure was on the lowish side of normal, but no indication that she had a diagnosis of hypotension or low blood pressure.
Could you use the microphone, please, Mr. Pryor?
Foundation judge, I'd like to know what report he's referencing where he saw that information.
And Your Honor, my question was just about the medical records that he reviewed in general.
All right, then he should be able to specify which medical record she's
All right,
talking
Mr.
about, Judge.
Schreier, this is not an objection. It's just an argument now. Is there an objection?
There is, Foundation.
All right. The objection is
Prior is sidebar Sally. He loves to argue. He's so argumentative. I mean, the judge has to tell him this isn't even an objection. You are literally just arguing with me right now. I mean, Christ.
overruled.
In the medical reports you reviewed, you didn't see any sign of low blood pressure.
I did not.
In the medical records you reviewed, did you see any signs of seizures?
No.
In the medical reports you reviewed, did you see any indication that Tammy had had a prior history of any negative drug interactions between her prescription medication and herbal remedies?
No.
And counsel asked you about the bruises on Tammy and them being labeled as not specific. Do you
Yes.
recall that?
Yes.
You indicated that sometimes you are able to form an opinion as to how those may have been inflicted. Is that correct?
I can answer hypotheticals about how they may have been inflicted. Yes.
And based on your training and experience, where those bruises were located, could they be consistent with someone being restrained?
They could be. Yes.
And you were asked a lot about those pictures and if someone was holding Tammy down and then suffocating her. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes. Yes.
Where the bruises were located, would it be possible for someone to have been restraining her while someone else suffocated her?
It's possible.
It's obvious what the prosecution thinks. That's what they
Based
think.
on your experience and and the autopsy and your review of documents, in your opinion, is it likely that Tammy died of a seizure?
No.
Based on your training, experience, review of the records and autopsy, is it likely that Tammy Daybell died of a cardiac arrhythmia?
No.
Based on your experience, review of the documents and autopsy, is it likely Tammy Daybell died of a drug overdose or drug interaction?
No.
Based on your experience, training, review of reports on the autopsy, is it your opinion Tammy most likely or likely died of asphyxiation?
Yes.
And again, what did you determine the cause
There
of
you
death to
go.
be?
Asphyxia.
And what did you determine the manner of death to be?
Homicide.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. That did not go beyond the scope of.
No further questions. So she left the jury with that impression here's the medical examiner, a ton of schooling and training, saying, no, I don't believe it was a drug overdose. I don't believe it was this, that. She checked off all the things and got to asphyxia and murder. And, the state is saying, is it possible that she was held down? As we know, again, Alex Cox's phone pinged the night Tammy was murdered at a church nearby their house. That was part of the forensic data testimony. So he was in the area. Most likely he was in there helping Chad hold Tammy down, suffocate her. And that's what a horrible way, because I was just thinking about it. This is the same guy, Alex Cox, that fired a gun at you, was trying to shoot you. And who do you call for? Tammy calls for her husband. This same husband gets this same guy to come into your room and into the most sacred part of your house, which is your bedroom, and hold you down or help kill you. I mean, how terrifying. How terrifying could that have been for her? So I want to go on to the next guest, Lauren Dellen, unless you have anything to input on
No.
all of that.
No, I think getting on to the person from the neighborhood in church who
Alice Gilbert.
Alice Gilbert was had a calling with Tammy, and so they spent more time together because of that.
Yeah. I think like we were talking about earlier, but I should just name this live stream like we were talking about earlier. But Alice Gilbert, I think, was a really impactful witness. She was the neighbor. She talks about knowing Tammy in tons of realms in her life, and a very sincere witness, and Chad just sort of throws Tammy's death and Lori on them, and her and her husband at the same. It's crazy. But we're gonna listen to her testimony, and just let me get there. Was it past this? I thought it was before that. I'm way too far, aren't I feel like it was before this that she was sworn in. Is that her? I don't have a timestamp for that. Oh, I do. Okay. I'm not even looking at my own timestamps. 3:11. Here she comes. Okay. All right.
Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Can I speak directly to them?
All right, I'll note that Ms. Gilbert's now been placed under oath. Before we begin with testimony, I just want to inquire, have you watched any of this trial on either the live stream or here in person at all?
No,
Okay, have you talked to anybody else about any testimony they've given in trial?
no.
Okay, thank you for letting the court know that. Ms. Blake, you can inquire on direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Alice Gilbert, ALICE GILBERT.
And Miss Gilbert, do you know an individual named Chad Daybell?
I do.
How do you know him?
He was my neighbor, and when we moved into the neighborhood, we got to know him through our community and our ward.
Did you also know Tammy or Tamara Daybell?
I do.
And did you know her the same way?
Yes,
And what did you refer to her as, Tammy or Tamara?
I called her Tammy.
And when you moved into the neighborhood, do you recall approximately when that would have been?
It was March of 2017.
And were the Daybells already living there?
Yes,
Did you get to know Tammy or Chad? Did you get to know one of them better than the other one?
Tammy. I got to know Tammy better.
And how did you end up getting to know Tammy?
We worked in the same church calling together, and so I got to know her through that church calling.
And when you say church calling, what church is that associated with?
The LDS church.
And what callings did the two of you hold where you worked closely?
I was the Relief Society president, and she was my first counselor.
How often do you think you saw Tammy?
We met once a week and on Sundays.
And did that seeing each other twice a week continue for an extended period of time?
Until her death.
And do you recall when the two of you were given the callings?
October of 2018.
So for about a year, you would see Tammy about twice a week.
Yes.
Did you get to know Tammy pretty well?
I thought so. I thought we did.
And can you describe, Tammy, a little bit your relationship with her? Let me back up. Can you describe a little bit about what Tammy was like?
Yes. She was great to work with. She was organized when we had our meetings. She could worked on the computer. So when we had to change anything, she could do it in a flash. She did all the computer work. When we organized activities, we valued her opinion and was grateful to have her input on things. And she would say, keep it simple, keep our activities simple. And we did, and that helped a lot. She had a lot of empathy for some of the women who were struggling in the ward, and she would relate those things to us in our meetings. She also had very good wit with her.
Did you have occasions to observe Chad and Tammy together?
I did, mostly at church, and they seemed great at church. You know, it was just normal. It was, and we had activities. He did come and help set up some chairs for activities, and so that seemed normal, and I really didn't think much of it.
At some point in time, did you feel like their interactions changed?
A little bit, yes. In 2019, it just seemed distant. It just seemed a bit distant between the two. But I just noticed them at church.
Did Tammy ever talk to you about her marriage?
She didn't. I think the only thing she did mention was that sometimes the finances were a little strained, but she didn't mention anything else.
When you observed Tammy, did you ever notice her appear to slow down?
No,
Did you ever notice any change in her activity level prior to her death?
no,
Did she ever complain to you about any health issues?
no,
Did you ever observe Tammy have any shaking fits?
no,
Did you ever observe Tammy faint?
no.
How did you learn about Tammy's death?
On the morning of the 19th, I received a phone call from Emma, and she was
Objection, Judge. This is going to call for some hearsay.
It's eliciting hearsay on that part, so that's sustained.
And just to clarify, when you say on the 19th, is that October 19th of 2019?
Yes.
And you indicated that Emma had phoned you. How did Emma seem when you talked to her?
She was sobbing.
And after that, based on that phone call, without saying what Emma said, did you learn anything in relation to Tammy?
That she had passed away.
Objection, Judge. Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
At some point, did someone else take the phone?
Chad, he took the phone.
And what did Chad tell you?
He asked me not to tell anybody for about an hour that she had passed away. And I said, well, I need to tell the bishop. And he said, no, don't tell the bishop. And I knew that the bishop was he was going to work. And so I called him anyway and informed him.
And what you called to inform him was of Tammy's death?
Yes,
Were you surprised to hear of her passing?
yes.
And why were you surprised?
I had just talked to her on Wednesday and she was fine. She was excited. She'd just gotten a new grandbaby. We had talked about Mark and his mission, and she had told us experiences of his mission, and she was excited with things.
On October 19th, after learning of her death, at some point, did you end up going to the Daybell residence?
Yes, my husband and I went over at about 8:30 in the morning, and Chad answered the door, and he gave us a hug, and we went in, and all the children, except for Mark and their spouses, were sitting there in the living room. They were stunned. The children were stunned. They could hardly speak and crying.
Did you end up making any observations of Chad when you arrived?
Yes, when I asked him what happened, and he said that Tammy vomited at midnight, and they think she passed away at 2 a.m., and that her legs were hanging over the bed, and that she'd fallen out of bed. He also said they think, like I said, that they think she died of an embolism.
And Chad provided all this information the morning of her death.
Yes.
How did Chad appear to you?
He wasn't as upset as the children. He was ready to tell us, and he wasn't as devastated as the children were.
And you indicated you'd just seen her the Wednesday before her death.
Yeah.
Did she complain to you at all that day of any health issues?
No, and I knew she was taking clogging lessons when we would have activity night.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point, just going into a narrative.
You can answer.
I can answer. We had activity nights, which started at, I think, 6:30. She would leave early, maybe 8 o'clock, because she was going to a clogging class. And so in my mind, I think I'm going home to bed at 8 o'clock. She was going to a clogging class. So I admired her for doing that.
On Wednesday, when you saw her, did Tammy have a cough that you noticed?
No,
Did she have any kind of a coughing fit around that time?
I didn't notice any.
After arriving at the Daybell residence, did you do something else that morning?
Yes, we had asked if they had breakfast and they hadn't. So my husband and I said, well, we'll go get you breakfast. And as we stood up to go, Chad told us that her funeral was going to be on Tuesday and a memorial on Wednesday. And I was surprised. And I said, well, did you plan this? And he said, no, but I was surprised that fast that he could tell me that.
And when you ask if he planned it, why did you ask that?
Because I know what it takes to plan a funeral with a ward and to organize the church and have the ladies in the ward provide the meal. And you need to ask the sisters to volunteer to provide meals. And it takes time. All of it takes time. So I was really surprised. But then he said her funeral was in Springville. That also surprised me because we were there in Idaho.
And do you recall what day of the week October 19th was?
Saturday,
And the funeral was going to be on the
Tuesday.
And did Chad respond when you asked if he had already planned the funeral or if he and Tammy had talked about it before?
He said no, but I felt like it had been planned.
Did you end up attending the funeral?
Yes. I needed to see her. So my husband and I went to the funeral in Springfield. I needed to see her in the casket. And she looked nice in the casket.
Did you ever talk to Chad about why he held the funeral in Springville?
I didn't. I just assumed it was because they lived there before. So I didn't ask.
When you were at the funeral, do you recall making any observations of Chad?
When we viewed her before the funeral, and it was just him standing by the casket. It didn't seem really mournful with him. I said, oh, she looks good. And he said, yes, she does. And we didn't cry. We didn't, it didn't seem mournful. And then we went into the chapel to sit for the funeral. And I sat by, and our bishop had driven down, so we sat with him.
During the funeral, do you recall if Chad spoke?
Yes, all the children spoke, and he spoke last. I was impressed with the children's talks that fast. They did a nice job to their mother. I was surprised because it takes a day to drive. So to go funeral on Tuesday, they would have driven Monday. They did the children did a nice job. And Chad spoke last. I was surprised because most spouses are too devastated to speak. And so I was surprised that he spoke at her funeral, and it was last. And it was like a church talk. The other talks were more loving tributes to their mother. His was more church talk.
More church talk. But, this is not the first time we've seen this with a witness. It was major red flags to a lot of people around Chad and Tammy, the rushedness. Again, she died on a Saturday. He wanted her buried on Tuesday. And as you heard Miss Gilbert say, this is just not how they do. They needed to notify people to prepare food. This is their faith. So for him to be rushing this, there's a reason, because 2 weeks and 3 days later, he was on a beach in Hawaii getting married to Lori Vallow.
And he couldn't have done it that way, the other way around, because my brother died January 31st, and I think it was a good 8 days before they could have the funeral up in Idaho.
Yeah, and like you just said in the chat, an interstate funeral, it took a week for, my father to be buried. And we're not of the LDS faith, but these things to rush that 3 days, die on a Saturday, you're buried on a Tuesday. I mean, you just hear the shock. And I think this witness, she was introduced to Lori, and to hear her reaction, again, very impactful.
Oh, and another thing, I think that they had to have an autopsy before they could ship him out of state. And so, that was one hoop. And so if they had done the autopsy, if it was, they were shipping her to Rexburg for because her family was there instead, there would have been he couldn't have got away without having the autopsy.
Yeah, and clearly, he did not want one. And I think you said yesterday or today that he wanted cremation, but the kids said no, because and didn't you say, because I that's not really good in the LDS faith, is that correct? That cremation is not really a good thing.
Cremation is frowned upon because the thought is when the person's cremated, then they, when they are resurrected, they're naked and they don't have their temple clothing for when they're resurrected, and so that's
awfully funny because Alex Cox was cremated.
Yeah, and I don't think he was a card-carrying member. He had some issues, as I understand it, that he wasn't.
Well, I think it just shows what the family thought of him, though. That they're all LDS, Lori's family. They still had him cremated. And it should be noted that Joe Ryan, Tylee Ryan's father, was also cremated. Lori, found him, and he was also cremated. And he had converted from Catholicism to the LDS faith for Lori. So
the same thing with Charles Vallow. He had converted for her.
Yes, he did. Yep. All right, so we'll continue with her testimony because I think it gets
one thing that Lolo just said is he told people Tammy was lazy and hard to live with. That's one thing that's a red flag, especially when you have somebody who's died. Is the normal is to gloss over anything that they did that was negative and just portray them as a saint. And so anytime somebody starts speaking ill of the dead, it's a big red flag. When
it really is, because when you think about it, I mean, just even people that have died, I know have died, people sort of get whitewashed. You kind of put the bad things to the side and really just talk about the good about them. I've known people that had really deep addictions and they died and they did a lot of bad things during that addiction. But, after they have passed, people tend to talk about their humor or how funny they were, just different positive things and not so much about those bad things. So that's a very great comment, Lolo, because it's true. So, okay, we'll continue on. Anything else, Lori or Glory? Damn it.
No. Just one thing for Lolo. Didn't Alex get excommunicated twice? How does somebody get excommunicated twice? Well, they get a chance to come back. And I knew a guy who got excommunicated 3 times. So,
wow. I didn't know that was possible. I thought just one and done, like the Amish.
No, it's actually considered a bit of a blessing, because then if you come back, you're baptized and all of your sins are forgiven you, and so you've got a clean slate at that point. And so, it's if the person comes back, it's a good thing for them, because it's kind of the ultimate forgiveness.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that. Thank you. All right. Ready? We'll go
Okay.
ahead. Okay. Well,
And do you recall if there was a memorial service held?
It was held the next day in Idaho, but I did not attend because I had just been to her funeral.
Did you end up having a role or playing a part in taking a meal to Chad's family?
Yes, so our presidency and the bishop provided a meal for them after the memorial, and so we took it over to them after, and we had put it down for them to eat, and the kids had started to eat, and Chad told us that he was moving out, that he couldn't be there, and that he was going to move to Rexburg to a condo. And we asked him, like, do you need help or anything? He said no, that his friend had a condo for him, that he wasn't there very often, so that he told him he could stay there.
And you said he, do you recall, did Chad refer to the friend as a he?
In my, I took it as that, and I'm thinking he said because he said he wasn't there very often, and so he could stay there.
that's obvious to me that he was referring to Alex.
I disagree.
Okay. All right.
I
Why?
disagree. He was going to live with Lori so they could have they could bless each other a lot. using
With
the
their
terms
loin
from
fire.
yeah, using our loin fire terminology, they're going to bless each other a lot.
No,
And
I agree with that. Oh, what did I do? I turned my volume down.
I'm not sure that Alex actually lived in the
Sorry.
apartment that he was renting
Ah.
because I think that when they
I can't hear anything at this moment. Oh no. Okay, I did something to my volume. I don't know if you can hear me,
I
Glendon.
can.
What did I do? Ah.
I understand that the Alex's
Oh, gosh.
apartment was pretty much empty of stuff, and it didn't seem like he
Let me
spent any time there. It was just for
So Tammy's
appearances.
Oh gosh. Can you hear me?
I can.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I've oh my goodness, where is my StreamYard?
Sometimes you have
Oh,
to
there I am.
refresh your phone.
Okay, I don't know if you can you hear me or no?
Yes.
Glory?
Yes, I can hear you.
Glory. You can't hear me?
Try.
You can hear
I
me?
can hear you.
Okay, I can't hear you. I somehow I muted or I turned off the volume and you were right in the middle of talking. No, it's not StreamYard. It is me.
Oh,
But I
okay.
muted it and all of a sudden I couldn't hear anything that you said. And okay, I'm so sorry. Can you say that again? Because I really could not hear anything. It went to 0.
Oh, okay.
Or,
I think that Alex wasn't actually
or
living in the apartment.
what the world?
No can hear.
Yeah, I'll refresh.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck. Oh, there it is. Okay. Glory, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank God. I don't, could you, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I did. I accidentally hit the mute on it, but could you just say what you were saying? I want,
Okay. If, as I recall from Lori's trial, there wasn't really that much in Alex's apartment, and it sounded like he was spending all his time over in Lori's apartment, and that it was purely for appearances' sake, and probably that the murders were conducted over in his place, and so it was kind of
yeah, I do agree with you there. I agree. I agree. He was talking about really living at Lori's, but I think he just used Alex because if anybody found out, it would just look better that he's going to go live with a single guy and not another woman. you know.
Yeah, him
So
going to live with a uh, a single
a
woman is
single widowed woman. Yeah.
very recently widowed.
Oh, and he's just magically now a widower. Look at that.
Yeah.
And she has no children. Oh yeah, and Miss Gilbert is going to talk about that. Chad saying that Lori recently had a daughter that had died, and I thought that was really like wow. So okay, let's go on.
Pronounced dead on Saturday, correct? And by the following Wednesday, Chad's got plans to move out of the house.
Yes.
Do you recall anything else that morning standing out to you as far as what Chad told his kids?
He had told his kids to go through Tammy's things as after he told us he was moving out, and that surprised me too. That's maybe I'm more sentimental, but it just seemed fast. And they kind of took it in stride, and I think they did do that.
In the time just after Tammy's death, did you have an opportunity to observe any of the Daybell children? So Chad and Tammy's children.
I went and saw Emma on Friday, and she was sobbing. She's really struggling, and she was getting really sick. She lost a lot of weight. We had organized meals for her. I know the school district was taking meals into her and Garth. She was struggling. She told me she missed
Judge,
her mother.
objection,
Grounds.
hearsay.
Sustained.
Did Emma appear to be struggling to you?
Yes,
Did Garth appear to be struggling as well?
yes.
And on Friday, to the best of your knowledge, had Chad moved out of the residence?
Yes. I think he moved after the memorial.
So you visited with Garth and Emma just less than a week after their
On
mother's
Friday. Yeah.
passing. Was Chad there when you went to visit him?
No.
So 6 days after she died.
And when you say the house you went to, what house was Emma staying in at that time? Do you recall?
Yeah, she lived Keeney corner from Chad's house.
And do you know what house Garth was staying in?
And Garth was living in Chad's house.
At some point, did you end up reaching out to Chad?
Yeah, so we thought we would call and see how he was doing. And I think it was Saturday, the 26th of October. We called him to see if we could come and visit with him. And he said no, that he would come to our place. So he came, that's on the 26th, he came over to our place. I think it was more toward the evening when he came.
And Judge, for foundation purposes, that would have been the month of what and year?
Like, do you want to clarify when that happened, please?
When you talk about the 26th, are we still in October of 2019?
Yes,
So just shortly after Tammy's passing.
yes.
And Chad indicated to you he didn't want you to come to his place, but he'd come to yours.
Yeah, he said, oh, I'll come over to your place. So we said, okay.
Did you ever end up seeing where Chad was living in Rexburg?
No,
And did he in fact end up coming to your place?
he did.
And did you end up having a conversation with him at that time?
Yes, he sat at our kitchen table, and I had made cookies and thought that, we would make it nice. And he said that he found the woman he was going to marry. And
Wow.
we were absolutely stunned when he said that. And we asked him, well, where did you meet her? And he said, at the conference in St. George in 2018. And we asked who she was, and he wasn't going to tell us at first. And then he said, well, I'll tell you. Her name is Lori Vallow.
Had you heard the name Lori Vallow before then?
I hadn't. I was thinking, who is Lori Vallow? And then he mentioned that she had done a podcast with Melanie Gibb. And then I realized that's who that was.
Had you ever met Melanie Gibb in person?
Not then. I hadn't met her in person.
And you'd never met Lori Vallow at that point?
No.
And to the best of your recollection, this was around October 26th.
Yes.
So just 7 days after Tammy's passed away.
Yeah.
Were you surprised to hear that Chad had already found someone else to marry?
Absolutely.
At some point, did you end up meeting Lori Vallow?
Yes. While he was at our home, he said that she was in town. Would we like to meet her? We said yes. Tuesday nights, my husband and I had gone to the temple. So we were in the temple on Tuesday nights. We were waiting in a room for a meeting to begin that following Tuesday. And he tapped us on the shoulder and had us step out in the hallway. And that's where we met Lori and her niece, Melanie, and a friend. And I cannot remember her name.
And that was your first time meeting Lori?
Yes,
And it was at the temple?
it was at the temple.
And Judge, could we have some foundation as to the date, time?
Your Honor, that's already been discussed.
I must have missed it,
Oh,
Judge.
Go ahead and say.
October 26th, John Pryor. I'll help
Ms.
you.
Gilbert, at some point after that, did Chad and Lori end up coming to your house?
Yes. And it was in that week, and I think it was Friday from that Tuesday that he came over with her. And it was cold when they came in. I asked her if she was getting used to the cold, and she said she'd bought some warm clothes. And they sat on the couch. And it was awkward.
And when you say it was awkward, did you make observations of Chad and Lori's interactions?
Yes, they were very affectionate with each other, more than I had ever seen Chad. It was very affectionate with her, and they were giggling and laughing, and my husband and I were embarrassed.
Had you ever seen Chad act that way with Tammy?
No.
Did you end up talking at that time?
Can I just say, this woman literally had secondhand embarrassment. It was that awkward. It was that awkward. I mean, what, 6, 7 days after they find out her friend that she sees twice a week is dead, and then you're like, oh, hey, I found somebody else to marry. And they're on the couch like two high schoolers, all over each other and affectionate and giggly and all of this stuff. I mean, your wife was just buried 3 days prior on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Yeah, 3 days. I mean, the fact that this woman said her and her husband were embarrassed, that it was just this guy. I mean, he is a cooked spud potato. But all right, carrying on.
To Lori about her family?
I did. I asked her if she'd been married, and she said yes, that her husband had died in December of a heart attack. I asked her if she had children, and then Chad said that she had recently had a daughter that had passed. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And I said, how many? And she said, thank you. And I said, how many children do you have? And she kind of stammered and said they were stepchildren, and I did not get a definite answer on that.
When Chad said that she'd recently lost a daughter, did Lori say anything to correct that or change it?
No.
That freaking turns my stomach. These two psychotic murderers are sitting here with these decent human beings and are able to look them in the face and say, oh, yeah, she just had a daughter that just recently died. They murdered her. Lori's been convicted of it. That's a fact for her. If it's a fact for her, you know darn well it is a fact for him. And just the fact, I mean, this is like true psychopathy behavior. I mean, how do you sit there and just look people in the face? Oh, yeah, her daughter just died. And you're the one that murdered and buried her and gave the okay for it. Mind-boggling. But carrying on.
And this would have occurred end of October, beginning of November of 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
You also talked about, you asked Lori if she was getting used to the cold. Do you recall anything about that particular October?
Yes, it was a very cold October. It was an early frost and a hard frost. So the farmers were getting their potatoes early. I used to work for an ag company, and so the importance of the potatoes not freezing, and not only that, they were helping each other to get their crops out early. So it was a cold October.
When Chad and Lori were there, did they talk to you and your husband about plans for a future together?
Yes, they had talked about getting married, but they didn't know when or where yet. They planned on taking the kids to Disneyland at Thanksgiving time.
And did Chad tell you anything about his plans to write a book?
Yes, he told us he was going to Hawaii to write a book.
Going to Hawaii to write a book.
But I didn't know they were going to live there. He just said he was planning on writing a book and going to Hawaii.
Loin fire
So
too.
Chad mentioned he was going to be going to Hawaii,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
And he and Lori also mentioned their plans to get married to you.
Judge, there's been some leading here.
Sustained.
And this took place in end of October, beginning of November 2019.
Yes.
When they talked about taking the kids to Disneyland, do you know which kids they were referencing?
It was Chad's children.
Did they ever mention taking any of Lori's children with them?
No, I had the impression that she was an empty nester, and I assumed the daughter was older, that had passed, from a disease or cancer or something, that I assumed she didn't have any other children.
Did Chad or Lori provide you any details as to how Lori's daughter died?
No, and I did not ask.
And Your Honor, I'm just looking at the time, and now may be a good time to take a break in testimony for the lunch hour.
Okay, appreciate that, Ms. Blake. We will go ahead and take the noon lunch hour. We'll take.
That's just so significant. I mean, if you've never met someone, and you're introduced to this person, nothing about their background. Like I was saying to Glory earlier, Rexburg, very small town. Everyone seemed to know everyone, know everybody's kids, that sort of thing. Lori Vallow, brand new on the scene. They don't know her. So if somebody just says, her Chad tells her, oh, her daughter passed away. You're just automatically going to say like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. You're probably not going to acquire too much, not knowing that person, not knowing if they want to share or if they're, whatever. So it's kind of insane that they were telling these things, because it's true. They just murdered her daughter. So yeah, she just died. So it's weird how open they were being. And then, all these people, they didn't know all the details. You have this person with these little details, this person. They had to pull all these people together, because that inner circle, Chad, Lori, Alex, and even though the state doesn't seem to want to put them in the inner circle, I'm personally putting them in the inner circle. But Melanie Gibb and Zulema definitely belong in that inner circle because they knew. Melanie Gibb being there, she was privy to their affair before anyone else. These people had no idea Lori Vallow even existed until days after Tammy Daybell was, died. But Melanie Gibb is watching them walk around a BYU track, holding hands and kissing and such, and all of that. She was there the night JJ died. She was there the night that Charles died. Allegedly, she stayed the night there.
Now, just one thing which Chad messed up, and you missed the testimony of Alice's husband, but he said that he said that she'd lost a daughter, but then he also says that there's a custody issue and things will be resolved and so forth when a subject of kids came up. So he told two vastly different stories. And
yeah, hard to keep up with your lies. And then he's filling out that application for that apartment in Hawaii. I always thought that was very telling that he wrote very neat, orderly couple with no children. It's just they were telling on themselves, and I guess they just really felt like they were the smartest people in the room and they were going to get away with this. until Nate Eaton ran up on them in Hawaii and busted
Yeah.
it all the way open. And thank God for, I mean, there's so many people behind the scenes. I mean, Kay, Woodcock, Heather Daybell. Heather Daybell said her initial reaction, Heather Daybell is Chad Daybell's brother, Matt. It's his wife. As she said, her initial reaction to Tammy dying was, he killed her. He killed her. And she said that her husband, got upset with her and said, stop saying that. And she said, no, I know he did something to her. Well, here we are. Here we are at this trial. But I want to talk about Emma Daybell for a minute. Do you think it's worth, because I have not watched it yet, but do you think it's worth watching Mr. Gilbert, Alice's husband's testimony?
Might be. You maybe put it on 1.25 to make it go a little faster.
Yeah. I did. I mean, we've already been on for an hour. An hour or so. I mean, it is 1 o'clock in the morning for me.
Yeah, it is getting a bit late. We've got court in the morning.
We got court in the morning. But one last thing, I just want to finish with this, Emma Daybell. I was talking to you earlier about, I feel like putting Emma on the stand is going to be a nightmare for the defense, because I feel like the prosecution, Miss Blake, is going to kindly, surgically rip her right apart. I mean, number one, she is John Pryor's tenant. And I was saying earlier that somebody in my comment section, the last video I did, the Daybell kids, they knew. Somebody in my comment section said, well, it's my understanding that John Pryor has a mortgage on it. Well, yeah, you don't go take mortgages out on other people's house. That's your house. That's why you're able to take a mortgage out on it. And just to reaffirm, Judge Boyce did say that Ron Arnold made a factual statement, okay, an unsolicited factual statement, but it is a fact that John Pryor owns Chad Daybell's former house. So either way, Emma Daybell lived there. She is a tenant, and I feel like that's a little weird. And then I seen it, I believe yesterday. Annie, who is Tylee Ryan's aunt, she said that Emma Daybell is still in contact with Lori Vallow. And I just find that crazy, because how is she going to say that her father was framed, but Lori Vallow was convicted of conspiring to kill her mother? Number one, if you're convicted of conspiring to kill any of my family members, I'm not talking to you anymore. Okay, we're not speaking. So
Well, even if you left Tammy out of it, she is murdered 2 of her children. She is facing trial for the murder of one of her dead spouses, and you would think, I don't want my dad anywhere near this she-wolf,
this woman,
Black
right?
Widow.
And well, exactly. And so, but if Emma Daybell is still in contact with Lori, does that mean she doesn't believe that Lori is the one that is framing her father? So who's left? Alex? Alex did all of this by himself just because. He just went and killed Charles and Tammy and Tylee and JJ, and then under the cover of darkness, without anyone knowing, he buried them in Chad's backyard. I mean, is that what you're saying? Because
in 15 minutes, he shows up in 15 minutes. The grave is dug and covered over. Yeah, no, somebody had the graves already open and waiting for his arrival.
exactly. But I just, again, if you guys don't know who Annie is, her channel is called A Murderous Heart. And she is a very analytical person.
Yeah, she's also got Analytics.
Yeah.
There's another channel.
Yeah,
that she has.
analytics, but she's been doing a lot on Murderous Heart, and
Yeah, but
I
if you
do.
want to see the older stuff, you go to analytics.
Yes, yes. So yeah, you could check out all her stuff, and she has a lot. She has just been designated officially as Tylee's representative. So when it comes time to give a victim impact statement, she will be representing Tylee. She was Joe Ryan's sister. So, but yes, isn't that crazy, Lolo? Yep. She is saying that Emma Daybell is still in contact with Lori. And I think that speaks volumes. And again, for all of these reasons, Emma Daybell also knew about Chad's teachings and this and that. I don't know if she's going to try to whitewash them, but I think she should be a little careful, because you have some people out there like myself who feel like they had a little bit more knowledge than they're saying.
Well,
Chad did not necessarily make it a secret that he thought Tammy was going to live a short life.
but
So
it did come out today that he did not pass that on to his kids. They weren't aware of his prediction about a Tammy dying at a young age. And so that, I think that was with Mr. Alice,
okay, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Gilbert. And
But how would he know that? I'm just saying, it's awfully weird that they knew about the teachings and the light and the dark and all that. Tammy is overheard by a coworker saying, my husband thinks I'm a zombie, but I don't think so. I mean, she knew about that. I don't know. I feel like they just there's more that they know, and I agree, Lolo. It's very sick. But I'll give you final thoughts, Glory.
Just one thing. I did feel a little better after listening to Alice's testimony, because she was saying that Emma was very distraught and she had lost a lot of weight and so forth. So it sounds like she wasn't a knowing person that, this is going to take place in advance and so forth, and that her distress does seem to have been genuine, is borne out by the weight loss, which is something that
Hopefully
I've experienced when
But
somebody.
even if it was, I mean, we know everything now. So how can you just deny all of these facts that are probably very hurtful to you, but they are what they are? The denial is very real.
Well,
But I'm gonna.
she's drunk the Kool-Aid. She's her daddy's daughter, and she's going to stick by him through thick and thin, unless she's playing a really good game of bluff and she gets up there and throws him under the bus, which I'd love to see, but I don't expect it.
If that happens, oh, that would make my day. That would make my whole day. Lolo is saying, is Emma the one who just had a baby? I'm not sure.
She had just had a baby at the time of Tammy's death.
Yeah, she had a little baby around that time, and then she had a little toddler, I believe, as well, right, Glory?
Sounds about right.
Yes, it sounds about right. So Gloria Dellin, just in case you guys don't know, she does stream this trial every single day on her channel, which is True Crime Utah. You see her, yeah, you see her in the chat. But she does stream it every day. So come over there and join us tomorrow, and we'll watch this together. And so I will see you guys later. Glory, thank you.
Okay. Sleep well.
You too.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.